Hello, everyone. This is Kalen North, and welcome to the first part of the Spirit Island 144 player game retrospective. With me today for this first part of it is one of the players and hosts of the game, Mathematics. Hello.
Hello, I'm Mathematics. I'm happy to be here with you today to talk about the 144 player Spirit Island game. It was
Yeah.
a lot of fun.
So this game started quite some time ago, or at least it feels like quite some time ago. But
Mhm.
it's just wrapping up now. My understanding is it hasn't like completely wrapped up. Is that we're quite sure that the win is here, but there's figuring out the final details still. Is that right?
Yes, the players have posted their final turns. The hosts are implementing those final turns. It'll be finished in, I believe, one more day.
Excellent, excellent. So we're gonna try and get this out, hopefully before that actually happens, but we'll see. And then, but yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the game just as an overall structure first. So here's the class of 144p. There were 24 hosts and 144 players. We had two copies of every spirit in the game, plus some exploratory versions of Shadows and Bringer, and the two apocrypha spirits, Covets and Spreading Rot. Did you? How involved were you, Mathematics, with the actual like setup and planning of this game? Were you involved in that somewhat, or did you mostly get involved later as a host?
I mostly got involved later as a host. I signed up as a player initially, and then they said they got so many signups. They originally planned to do a 72 spirit game. They got so many signups that they decided to do 144 spirits instead, with two copies of every spirit instead of one. But they said, hey, we can only do this if we have more hosts. And I said, okay, I guess I'll sign up.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely remember some of the discussion, and there was like a poll, I think, at one point of like, hey, should we stick to 72 or should we jump to 144 because we have like 150 people who are interested or something like that. And it was
Yes,
pretty
roughly.
cool. Um,
Mhm.
I think one thing that impressed me with this is I started as one of those 144 players, but I actually had to drop out around turn 4 or 5 just due to real life obligations. But I feel like there weren't that many substitutions. I feel like most of these players were there from the beginning, and I
Yeah,
really appreciate the person who stepped in for me. But yeah, it's a very cool thing there.
yeah. I don't have the exact numbers, but my rough impression is that like less than 10% of the spirits got substituted.
Yeah,
Like
which
the vast majority were there for the whole time.
yeah, for a game of Spirit Island over the internet that lasted months, that's just crazy to me. It's so cool. I love that.
Yep.
But
We
yeah,
have over 100 people who like were focused on this game for over 3 months.
yeah, that's just so cool. And I think then let's talk a little about like the structure of the game. So uh, we had we had two big continents. Can you tell me about those?
Yeah, we again the structure was set up this way roughly because of the initial plan to do 72 spirits. Each one of those individual continents was enough to hold all 72 of the spirits. And when we doubled the size of the game, we doubled the number of continents and put one of each spirit on each continent. And the continents were like each continent was divided into a bunch of different smaller sections, each assigned to a host. Each smaller section had 6 boards in it, with the most of the sections had 6 spirits starting on them, except for the boards right in the center of each continent. All of those started out empty because we played with some extra boards
Yeah,
to
there
increase the difficulty.
36 extra boards if I remember. So 72 player boards and then 18 empty boards on each of the two continents.
Yep,
Yeah, and
that's
then
roughly the same ratio as it would be in a 4 spirit game with one extra board.
okay. And then was that how the setup was done for the invaders on the extra boards, or did we do something else on that? I can't recall.
We set it up with a few extra invaders as if it were a 6 player game, 6 board game, 5 players with one extra board.
Okay,
That didn't end up impacting the difficulty very much.
sure thing. Yeah. So then you talked about each board or each like mini island had its own host. It had its own channel on the Discord server. Um, it had its own unique emoji. Do you have any insight
Yep.
on the emojis? I enjoyed these a lot.
Uh, yes, they were a lot of fun. They were especially helpful in like they were both fun to talk about and did their job of helping people identify lands uniquely. Like in a normal game of Spirit Island, you might talk about I'm targeting land F3 with this power. In this giant mega game, then in each mini islet, in each mini island, we had the island's emoji. Like I started on the Books Island on the Orange Continent, and on the Books Island we have boards labeled PQR, ST, and U. And so you would talk about I'm targeting land book E3 with this power.
Yeah. So every
And that,
board got like a double name, because you know it's still like boards A through H, but like we had to use all these other letters because there was just too much ambiguity otherwise. Because some of these islands had repeats of boards.
yes. But my island had two different copies of board E in it.
Yeah.
There were books S and books T.
Other than that, there was a shared fear deck. Huge fear total, 720 fear per card. Shared event deck between all players, which we'll talk about a little more in a minute when we get to discussing Fractured Days. Uh, and then, but each island had its own major and minor deck, was another cool thing that allowed certain powers to get drafted over and over and over again across the game.
Yes.
Um,
And
I,
that was super cool.
yeah, we
Yeah,
just were able to
it
get
needed
so
to be
much.
that way from a functional standpoint because like they're all 144 players drawing from the same power deck would run out the deck extremely quickly.
Oh yes, of
But it
course.
was also really fun to see what multiple copies of the same card could do.
Yeah. I remember I made a pitch early on in the game that people should draft Call to Migrate, and I think 5 copies of it or something got drafted on turn one. Just because Call to
Yes,
Migrate in Dahan Insurrection is suddenly a much better card. Um,
yes.
and actually, speaking
Yep,
of
we were
Dahan,
playing with the Dahan insurrection scenario where whenever you move Dahan, you deal damage.
yeah,
But then whenever you destroy cities and towns, the invaders spawn towns and explorers at the nearest Dahan.
yeah. So it was that plus the Scotland 6 adversary, and then with all the extra boards, the difficulty of this game on paper was somewhere above 18, which is kind of ridiculous. But also,
Yes.
I don't think anyone was going into this expecting to have any outcome other than a victory. Just
Yeah.
because it seemed like with 144 spirits, the synergies available to the players were just so absurd.
Yes, in the initial announcement post for this, then there is a comment on that saying, "Hey, this looks like a super high difficulty game, but don't worry, like there are some spirits that are really busted in combination, and we have all of the spirit combinations."
Yeah. Well, and the other thing
It,
too,
it definitely played out that way.
yeah, I definitely know that some of the people who are playing in this game, this was like maybe their third or fourth game of Spirit Island, which is crazy to me. But a lot of
Uh
people
huh.
had friends who had played Spirit Island with them a couple of times and were like, "Oh, this sounds like a cool thing. Let me get in on that." Or you should get in on this. I'll press gang you into playing with us. And
Yep. There was one player who had played like that, like you said, two or three times before, and their favorite spirit was Reach Shadows, and they knew someone in real life, and that person was, "Hey, you should join this game and play Reach Shadows," and they did.
yeah. Oh, so much, yeah, lots of fun stuff there. So we mentioned a little bit of the craziness with all of the spirits being available to the game. So my understanding then is the hosts put some limitations to not necessarily just make things more complicated and fun, but also to try and keep things from devolving into cheese strategies that we've seen before. Um,
Yes. Part of this was experience from the 68 player game, which I was not a part of, but read some summaries of.
yeah,
And so some of these rules are specifically meant to nerf strategies that we're centralizing in that game.
yeah, and now that game, if memory serves, no, I'm thinking of the 25 player game. There's been several of these mega games, and they keep getting bigger. So who knows how big the next one's going to be? Um,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, I know in one game there was a fear farm strategy where Bringer managed to just repeat infested aquifers on a land with a bunch of cities at 1 health in it over and over again for like over almost 1,000 fear. I think it was like 963 fear or something like that to just empty a
Mhm.
fear deck. Which,
Yeah.
admittedly, in this game, that would not have emptied the fear deck. That would have earned 1 fear card. but
Yes.
still, that's a lot of fear. And so, I guess I'm skipping a little ways down the list. But there's a hard limit of 100 fear per spirit per turn. So basically, the bringer players, because there were eight of them in this game. There's Base Bringer,
Yes.
Enticing Bringer, Violence Bringer, and then the Exploratory Bringer. And that meant potentially some ridiculous fear farming. But in order to try and prevent that going crazy, one, there was the Dahan insurrection scenario, but also this fear cap.
Yes, the Dahan insurrection scenario sort of limits fear generation as a strategy inherently, because if you get to Terra level 4 without getting the island under control, then you have one final step where the Dahan deal damage to the invaders, and then if you don't meet the victory condition, you lose.
Yeah, that's the only way to lose at Terra level 4 that I know of.
Yes.
Or Terra level victory, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, so there were some archipelago rules. Basically, the continents could connect along the outer edges. There were a bunch of like inland seas that you could cross over to help players get more connections to the abandoned boards in the center of each continent. The Scotland escalation, I think, was particularly hilarious and brutal, which was 90 towns to the island, so 6-board region with the most coastal buildings on each continent, which that's a lot of towns. Like, I mean, you have 6 boards, 8 lands per board, and you're adding 90 towns to that. That's over 2 towns per land.
Yeah, it ends up being not quite 2 towns per land because there are 96 lands on each islet, but roughly 2 towns per land.
Okay.
Yeah, but
okay,
yeah, it's still not quite as big of a dump as if we did the Scotland escalation as written, which would be you put all 144 towns in the all 180 towns in the same board.
Yeah, which would
have
been totally
with the most
ridiculous.
Coastal buildings. Yes, but also that would have been even more easily feasible by just casting down that board immediately afterwards.
Yeah, which would somewhat ruin the fun, and yes, cast down
this
was
made
definitely
it more of a group
play.
effort.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then taxation without representation, in order to try and limit just piling all the support onto one spirit, targeting a spirit not on your island. So again, 6-board region, you paid 2 energy. If they had presence on an adjacent 6-board region, you paid 1 energy. Finder adjacencies counted, but this really, I think, helped encourage players, certainly me when I was more involved with it, to go to other islands and actually spread out more.
Yep. This is a modification of the archipelago rules, where if you're on different islets, then you have to pay 1 extra energy for each islet you cross jump. And we thought about just doing like 1 extra energy per distance in islands count through that person, but we decided that it'd get too complicated with finder adjacencies and such. We just decided to cap it at 2.
Yeah, I think that was the right
call. And
it
still ended up working out. Yeah. Yep. And it kept it understandable while still achieving the same goal of encourage you to work with the people near you, but also spread out to adjacent places so you can get cheaper taxes.
Yeah. Then let's see what else there was. The spirit actions with the same name cannot trigger each other. That's an interesting one. My understanding is that was primarily to try and limit like Melt Earth cheese.
Yes. You're using multiple copies of Melt Earth into Quicksand or Call to Guard to set it up so you damage invaders in one land, push them to another land, damage them in that land, push them back. And because you have multiple copies, each triggering a separate tree, that ends up getting super exponential if you do it multiple times. You cast the same power multiple times.
Yeah, that just, I think, that would have cheesed the game in a way that was not fun for players as much. So, all right.
Yep.
Then proliferation, I think that was a big one too.
Yes, that was partially inspired by the Ouroboros strategy from the 68-player game, where the Serpent players were absorbing each other and giving each other multiple proliferations per turn. And like in general, the strategy was if you have a proliferation, target Serpent with it, and then Serpent wakes up on like turn 3.
Yeah, which is hilarious.
We wanted the Serpent players to be good, but not quite that good.
Yeah. So and this became relevant too on one turn in the game when Years a Little Rain was the event, and so it was ruled that is not a spirit action. So you could still get your proliferation from Years a Little Rain without necessarily having locked yourself out by having gotten a gift of proliferation or what else.
Yep.
And then
this last one listed power cards. Spirits cannot hold more than 1 copy of the same card. This was a limitation on Bitcrafter, the software we use to implement each player's islands and card hands. Like that software literally can't have 2 copies of the same card in the player's hand.
Yeah. Um,
The only way that could, in theory, happen is with Men for Memory or Entwined Power passing cards back and forth because there's only one copy of each card in the island's deck. So
yeah,
like you could pass your copy of a card to another island, and the big crafter admins would take care of that. But you had to pass it to a spirit who didn't have a copy of the same card.
yeah. Now that's
And then
something.
one more, which I think we forgot to list on there, is that for Cast Down into the Briny Deep and Dream of the Untouched Land, yeah, as printed, Cast Down into the Briny Deep is unlimited, and Dream of the Untouched Land is once per game. We decided to modify both of those so each of those can be used once per game per copy of the card, the
Ah,
threshold.
okay. So there's well, there's a lot of boards, but basically you're limiting to about 25-ish cast downs over the game, so we can't just destroy the whole continent.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
But at the same time, we're relaxing it a bit on Dream of the Untouched Land, where instead of only one person can ever do this per game, it's, hey, you can do this once per copy of the card if you want.
Yeah. All right. Um so I think then uh let's move on and talk a little bit about some of the craziness that happened in the game. I've got a list of some of the major plans that went on. LRLR was the
Yep.
double Lair Lure.
Yes. Lair Lure, in case you're not familiar, has an innate that says, first of all, that at the first level, you downgrade, for every 3 explorers or Rodahan in the land, you downgrade a town or city. And then at the final level, it says, for every 6 explorers or Rodahan in the land, you you pick an invader within range equal to the number of air you have and gather it one land towards where Lairs Incarna is located. So if you had 2 air, then you could then if you had 2 air and you had 30 explorers and Dahan in the land, then you could gather an invader one land closer to Lair 5 times.
Yeah.
And 30 is a bit low for where that number ended up.
Yeah. So basically my understanding is the with help from the finder players, the two players on Lair Lure ended up with their lairs in the same land, and we just piled explorer after explorer after explorer into that land.
Yes. And so in one turn, if they started with, say, the 30 explorers, then one of the lairs would gather 5 more invaders in, and the other would downgrade a bunch of invaders, gather 1 or 2 more, and then gather 6 in. And it keeps growing from there. It grows exponentially, and we were also all dumping in more invaders into that land in the process.
Yeah. This was one of those things that I saw happening, and I was like, this is really cool. I have no idea how this is going. My understanding is people were like writing code to try and optimize some of the aspects of this, just because trying to handle 50 or 100 gathers was just overwhelming.
Yes, I want to shout out Palimstat here, who was playing Locust, and they wrote code to implement to like create a structure describing all of the adjacencies on the island, so they could input the codes and list, hey, find all of the wetlands within range 3 of where the lairs are. And also, here's all of the lands where the lairs are, because with Weave Together the Fabric of Place, then they combine multiple lands into the same land.
Oh
So
yeah.
find all the wetlands within range 3 of this set of lands. So the code was able to do that.
Oh, that's that.
That
Yeah.
definitely helped a lot.
Yeah, that is super cool though. Just because of the craziness of like you have the layers, but you also have weave going on with finder portals, and just
Yep.
all of this craziness.
Specifically, how that worked is that like Finder is able to make 2 of its lands adjacent. So Finder would have 2 presence on totally different islands, but maybe even on different continents, and would make those lands adjacent. And somebody would play Weave Together the Fabric of Place and make 2 adjacent lands into the same land. So now we have these 2 lands that are not near each other at all physically, but they are now the same land. And then somebody repeats the weave, and you take a different finder presence and connect that land with the other land using weave. And then somebody repeats weave again, and you pick a different finder presence and connect those 2 lands into the same land. And you end up getting a list of like, here's all the 6 places where the lair is this turn.
Yeah, I know I don't have any pictures of them right now, but I know that some people made some really cool heat maps. I don't know if that was out of the code that you were mentioning earlier, or if that was a different piece of work that was put together. But just showing like this, all of these lands are the lair. These lands are like within one of the lair. These lands are within 2 of the lair, and just it was
Yes.
amazing.
Mhm. So then they were able to say things like, all the lands within range 1 of the lair are getting solved. At range 2, we're going to solve all the lands that are ravaging or building this turn. At range 3, if you want us to solve those lands, contact us and we'll prioritize them.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of crazy weave shenanigans and finder portals, let's talk a little bit about the double 10 presence volcano eruption.
Yes. So Volcano has the Volcano's max innate says destroy 10 presence, and then if you do that, if you have enough elements and destroy 10 presence, then every land within range 1 of the volcano takes 4 damage, invaders into Han, and every land within range 2 of the volcano takes 8 damage. And then the lands within range 1 also add blight, if they don't have it already.
Yeah.
And you can do similar things to what we described with Lair, where if you put a finder presence on the volcano origin and a finder presence somewhere else, you can have finder make those lands adjacent, and you can use weave to make those into the same land. And now you have a volcanic eruption, which is happening in that land, but now because that land is in 2 places at once, you have way more lands that are within range 1 and way more lands that are within range 2, so you can multiply the damage without any extra investment from the volcano player. They don't need to destroy twice as much presence. And so I started on an island adjacent to one of the volcanoes, but I also started on an island with one of the Lair players. So we made a plan, starting before turn 1 of the game, when we realized this is the positioning. Like specifically, the volcano made a plan to grow onto the Books Island, where there was a nice mountain with a lot of adjacencies. And we planned for the Lair player to start on that island so that the Lair player could abandon that island to go get the 2 layers into the same location.
Gotcha.
And then, so Lair abandoned that island, leaving it for the invaders to basically do all of their things on with nobody handling that island. But that was okay because we wanted to add lots of invaders to that land so that we would have lots of things to kill at the eruption. And then Volcano grew onto that board. We got Volcano a lot of presence, and we made plans for this Volcano player to erupt on turn 6, to destroy 10 presence on turn 6. And we made a few players, but when we heard players picking up weave, we let them know that we wanted their investments for turn 6. And then on turn 4-ish, the other Volcano player heard about our plans and decided they wanted to get in on the action. So they sourced a bunch of support and a lot of extra presence placements and proliferations, and they erupted on turn 5.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing.
So they got to it first.
Oh.
The plan for that eruption looked pretty similar.
Yeah.
Weave a few different lands together, erupt, deal a bunch of damage in multiple places at once.
So, despite the fear limits in place, I hear there was still a fear farm. I don't think I actually saw this much, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was set up on the Ghost Islet, where that island started with a couple of Bringer players, as well as a Rising Heat of Stone and Sand. I forget if the Rising Heat players started on the same island or started near it, but they were near where the fear farm was going to be. So they got 2 Rising Heat presents, and Rising Heat has a special rule that says at your sacred sites, then invaders have 1 less health, to a minimum of 1. Now all the towns have 1 health, and the cities have 2 health. And then they dealt 1 damage to each of the cities per turn, and they put some Badlands in the land. And they put out requests to all the players saying, hey, if you're sending invaders anywhere via things like Bargain of Coursing Paths, which lets you mark a land, and when invaders are moved into that land, send them anywhere on the board. That if you're sending towns and cities anywhere, can you send them to this particular land on Ghost? And they named it Ghost partially because they wanted to do some fear shenanigans on that island.
Nice.
Yeah. So then they got a land with a lot of cities, with a lot of towns. They put some Badlands in the land to make it easier to multiply damage. They had players who could do real damage, do 1 damage to each of the cities. So now 1 damage is enough to kill each of the cities. And then they would have Bringer players do damage in that land, ideally with 1 damage to each invader powers. Like I believe one of the Bringer players picked up the major power Blazing Renewal, which is 2 damage to each invader.
Yeah.
To each city and town. And that's enough to green kill every single city and town in the land. And that means each city generates 5 fear, and each town generates 2 fear. And with enough cities and towns in the land, then that was enough to immediately hit the fear cap with that 1 action.
Yeah. So then, with at least 2 Bringers,
and then they
in play,
also
that's
isolated
200 fear a turn. So that's
Yes.
Oh yeah, and
they were able to get a few other Bringers. Yeah. They also isolated the land so the towns didn't get pushed out in between.
Yes, very important. All right.
Yep. So they were able to generate a few hundred fear per turn, and then on turn 7, fast, Then they had all of the invaders, all of the bringer players do that again. They got a few bringer players to join who hadn't been able to participate before. And then as the last action, then they had one of the bringer players do that damage and push all the towns out. And they pushed them into an adjacent ocean.
That must have made the ocean player
So they
happy.
drowned all the towns, and because of Dahan insurrection, there was a military response where the invaders added a bunch of explorers to that same fear farmland. Then they had a violence bringer damage all of those explorers for even more fear.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And push them into the ocean again.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
And then killed all the cities as well.
Nice. So talking about oceans a little bit, there was this big play called the Great Coastal Defensive that I think started getting talked about around turn 4 and then ended up happening on turn 6. Can you talk about that one a little bit?
Yes. Yeah, this didn't actually have anything to do with the ocean players, but the coastal card, the coastal ravage was the coastal lands ravage. Because of Scotland, we knew where it was going to be, and it ended up happening on turn 6. Normally, that ravage would be on turn 7, but the Fracture player swapped the coastal land with the stage 3 card, so the coastal card was happening first. The coastal lands were ravaging on turn 6, and on turn 4, one of the Shadows players, an amorphous Shadows, picked up Bargains of Power and Protection. And Bargains of Power and Protection, what it does is when you play it, you set aside one of your presents onto the reminder card, and from now on, every Dahan within range 1 of your presents comes with Defend 1 attached all the time. So if there are 3 Dahan in a land within range 1 of your presents, then that land has Defend 3. And if you play the power multiple times, it adds to the defense. So if you would play, so this Shadows player was able to, with some repeats, play the Bargains of Power and Protection 4 times total. So every Dahan within range 1 of their presence had Defend 4 attached. And then we found some players to give them range extensions, because those do work on measuring the range arrow through the Dahan in the power card text. So because we knew the coastal lands were ravaging, we specifically sourced copies of Sky Stretches to Shore, which it targets a spirit. That spirit can make a power fast, and it lets that spirit get +3 range for measuring range to coastal lands. And we used the same adjacency code that was mentioned earlier for the Lair, and we figured out, okay, how close can we get? Like, how many copies of Sky Stretches do we need to cover the entire island, both continents, every single coastal land? And it ended up being if you put presents in these 6 specific places, then you can get +9 range and have every single coastal land be within 10 range of your presence. And because it's amorphous Shadows, they have the ability in slow or fast to move presents to any land with Dahan on the island. And so they were able to get their presence in all 6 of those locations. And we gave them 3 copies of Sky Stretches to Shore. So they were able to give every single coastal land Defend 4 per Dahan. So a land with 3 Dahan in it would have Defend 12.
Oh, that's amazing. This is just more evidence to me that Amorphous Shadows is secretly the best spirit in the game. I love Amorphous Shadows, even if it's maybe not actually always that strong. But yes, with this level of support and that level of just the presence movement, that's so cool.
Yeah, and because of that, because there was so much defense on the coast, and the event that turn also, we'll get to event manipulation in a moment, but the event that turn also gave us some Dahan movement to position Dahan in the best places.
Oh yeah.
And because of that, on turn 6, then the entire island, both continents, took only 2 blight, and that was because a couple of the stone players decided to take blight on purpose so they could strike damage back, and because it was on the coast, Scotland added blight to the ocean. So those 2 blight in the ocean, 1 per stone player, was the only blight we took that turn.
That's amazing. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I think it reinforces how broken the synergies in this game when you have this many players is.
Yes. All right. And also this many power card decks, because that means there are 3 copies of Sky Stretches to Shore in the game, and more than that, so we were able to find 3.
Yeah. I suppose, yeah, it would have been more difficult if like you had to figure out some way to do that just with repeats or something in a smaller game, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a list of some of the crazy other awesome stuff that happened in this game. I don't know if how much you want to talk about each of these, but Early unrelenting growth spam, I actually was not directly involved in, but one of the players on my starting islet was a memory player who drafted unrelenting growth on turn 1, and then I believe played it 4 times on the first turn.
On the second turn, I believe.
Was it on the second turn? Okay, I thought they. I must be mixing things up then, but they played a lot of unrelenting growths, very fast, and it was kind of amazing.
Yes. Yep, I believe they took the +9 energy growth on turn 2 to be able to afford as many copies on the repeats as possible.
Got it. That's what it was. Okay. Yeah. No, I just.
Yep, and also got some energy boons.
Yes, energy
from
boons.
Things like a Power Storm.
Power Storm. They probably got a gift of constancy or two just to keep the unrelenting growth in their hand.
Yes.
Lots of crazy stuff with that though.
Yeah. The island I was on started with a vital strength of the Earth player, Nourishing Earth, and so we were I believe 2 islands away from the Phoenix Island, where the player picked up unrelenting growth turn 1, and so we started cooking, and we found some ways to get elemental support to Earth, and the Nourishing Earth was able to play the right cards on turn 2 to max out the Gift of Strength innate, which lets a spirit repeat a power card with a certain cost or less without paying its cost. So with the max innate, it lets them repeat a power card with cost 6 or less without paying its cost. And then we got and then the memory player was able to use one of the unrelenting growths on themselves to grow onto Book's Island, so Earth was able to target them tax-free.
Nice. Yeah.
And give them a free repeat on the unrelenting growth.
Yeah, the tax evasion, I think, was a cool thing in this, is players would figure out sometimes incredibly convoluted ways to get presents to the same islands as each other, which was, I think, really cool, and again, part of the fun of the coordination of this game. But yeah, the early unrelenting growth spam was really cool and got a lot of spirits going faster than they would have normally. The Darkfire Death Evasion, this was related to, was it a blight card or an event where we had to lose a lot of presence?
Yes, Darkfire has an ability that says if your presence would be destroyed, you can push it instead once per action. And the blight card we got said on each board you can, I forget the exact details, but you can either take you can either take a blight or destroy 2 presence from any spirits on that board. And there are 2 Darkfire players. So the 2 of them got onto the same land, and so when that board's action happened, they destroyed their 2 presence, which covered that board. Nobody on that board had destroyed presence to stop the blight, and they both pushed that presence, and they pushed it into a portal from Bargain of Coursing Paths, which you can see the next item on that list is Portals and Finder Network. Bargain of Coursing Paths says you mark 2 lands on the island, each with 2 Dahan, and from now on, whenever any pieces are added or moved to those lands, you put them anywhere on the island. And so they moved their presence into the portal that had previously been created with Bargain of Coursing Paths, and teleported to another island. And then we resolved that island board's action. They destroyed their 2 presence there and pushed their presence onto an adjacent land, which was on a different island, and then destroyed their presence on that board to save that board, so nobody there had to add blight or destroy presence, push onto a different board, destroy their presence there, push into a portal, teleport to another island, and do it all over again.
I will note...
We had some people creating chains on the map saying each land on this chain is on a different board, and the chain ends in a portal so they can go to the next chain.
That's awesome, yeah. I will note that this does actually work in slightly smaller games. Like if you're playing 6 players with the star layout and you have a Darkfire presence in one of those central lands, you can just do the little circle around all of the central lands and avoid presence destruction that way too, which is one of the cool things, since again I'm apparently shouting out shadows as much as possible in this video. One of the many cool things about Darkfire, I think. So the portal,
and specifically because we had 2 Darkfires in this game, then they were able to do twice as much of that to stop a blight card that required people to destroy 2 presence.
Yeah. So then the portal and Finder Network you touched on a little bit there. Is there more you wanted to say on that? I mean, just to people who know Bargain.
Yeah, I think this was so central to how the game's plans ended up playing out that it ended up being involved. Like this was involved with the Lair plans. This was involved with the volcano plans. This was involved with the Fear Farm plans, because that was how people were sending all these towns and cities to the farm.
Yeah.
And the Finder presence was how people were able to get all these adjacencies to be able to use unrelenting growth on, remember using unrelenting growth on itself and growing to a land 1 space away, but that land was a land with a finder presence, so it could be on a totally different island.
Yeah. I definitely
Yeah,
remember a fun one
these
with.
adjacencies were. Yeah,
Okay, I was just gonna say I
I
remember a
just
fun
go
one.
to summary.
Sorry.
Yeah, awkward.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, you talk.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to sum that up with like these adjacencies were like they were incredibly fundamental to how the game played out. Like we started out being much more disconnected, except on if you started near a finder presence, then you could do a bit of the cool jumps. And then on turn 2, we got a couple of bargains portals. Turn 3, I think we got one more, and then turn 4, we got a bunch more bargains portals. So as the game went on, the lands got more and more connected, and it was easier and easier to place presence anywhere on the island from anywhere if you were close to a bargains portal that had been created.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's move on a little bit to the fractured coordination. So fractured has some innates, or has an innate in particular that lets it look at the event deck or the invader deck, and then do things with that. So
Yes.
so how did with 2 fractured players in the game, how did we go about abusing that?
Yeah, well, first of all, in a smaller game, like in a game with only 2 to 6 spirits, then this ability can be nice, but it's still like a lot less valuable. Like it's something that is nice to get if you get it, but it's not something you plan your whole game around. In a game this big, knowing what events are coming up is incredibly useful because it lets every single spirit in the game make plans based on that. And so starting on the first turn, then we started coordinating to give all the fracture players as much support as they could, so each of them could hit that innate. Ideally, both of them hitting the innate every turn. I don't think we quite got it to every turn. And so sometimes it was only them hitting level 1 to look at the event and shuffle it in the top 2. Sometimes it was hitting the second level to look at the event and either shuffle it in the top 2 or put it on the bottom. And that was incredibly helpful for helping people make plans on time. Knowing which events were coming up would help them put beasts in the right places, put Dahan in the right places, and arrange things so that any of the main events wouldn't totally ruin their plans.
Yeah. I definitely appreciated as a player having access to like, oh, I've got a 50% chance of getting this event this turn. That's really helpful. So it was
Yeah.
pretty cool to see that.
And so yeah. Yep. So for example, on the turn right before the Great Coastal Defensive, then they looked through the event deck and found out, hey, a lot of these events moved Dahan or removed Dahan, stop defense. And so they made sure to have the fracture players use their innate low the previous turn, with the option to use it fast the next turn with some support from other spirits making their powers fast, to try to get an event where we were 100% certain what the event was going to be, so players could make plans knowing that.
Yeah.
And the good thing we did, because the first event we found was one that either would say, Dahan, don't participate in Ravages this turn, or every spirit has to destroy a Dahan in one of their lands.
Oh no.
And we as the players, we had a huge discussion about that, and eventually it was pretty obvious that most people wanted to put that one on the bottom.
Yeah.
Like there was some discussion about whether knowing that was coming would let people make enough plans, even though it was a bad event. Then we decided, no, this event is so bad, we really, really need to get rid of it.
Yeah, good old Dahan trade with the invaders.
Yep.
Oh,
That's the name of it, right?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, unless I'm mixing up which one, but yeah.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yes.
Yeah, and then you mentioned earlier too the fractured player getting the coastal card up a turn faster so that the coastal defensive could go off. Just again with the fractured players doing quite a bit to, I think, help with some of the overall like randomness that there is in Spirit Island, keep that under control for this game.
Yep. And also, the fractured players were pretty involved with the double lair plan too, because the double lair over time accumulated a huge amount of invaders, and so they would have somebody with instruments of their own ruin use it thresholded on the land with the lair, and then the fractured players would use Blur the Arc of Years to cause a ravage in that land and make the invaders damage all the adjacent lands.
Oh, that's
so because
amazing.
of that, they would use the lair innate not to gather invaders all the way to the lair, but to gather them to within range 1 of the lair. And then instruments to their own ruin plus Blur the Arc of Years would instantly wipe all those lands. And then all the towns and cities in those lands would cause a military response, which goes to the nearest land of Dahan, which is the lair.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, I
And,
missed
and
that.
so it ended up being a more efficient gather that gathered tons of invaders all at once.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that. Oh, So let's go on to some of the drama that there was in the game. The first escalation on Orange Continent in particular.
Yep. As we mentioned earlier, the escalation was slightly modified, Scotland escalation, to instead of adding all the towns to one board, add 90 towns to the island with the most coastal towns and cities on each board, on each continent. So there would be 90 towns to one of the islands on orange and 90 towns to one of the islands on blue. And from the beginning, the blue had the double lair. That was where the two lair players set up. It was on the Mauritius islet, the Mauritius island of blue. And so from the beginning, they were coordinating to make sure they had a lot of coastal towns and cities because they wanted all those towns on their island so they could gather them into the lair easily.
Yeah.
Later on, the lair ended up in a lot of different places, but that's where it was for the first 4-ish turns of the game.
Yeah.
And so they wanted to make sure they took the escalation. So that was easy. They said, yeah, we can take the escalation, and everybody's like, yeah, you can take it. You take it. We'll have a great time not taking it. On orange, there was much less consensus about that. And so there were a lot of islands like talking about, can we take the escalation? That'll ruin all of our plans. Can we take the escalation? That'll ruin all of our plans.
Yep.
And there were eventually after some discussion, there were like a couple Books and Mountain were the two islands that said, hey, maybe we could take the escalation if it works out that way. And out of those two, Mountain had a lot more coastal buildings already, so we settled on Mountain's probably going to be the one to take the escalation. But that Mountain had roughly the same number of coastal buildings as some other islands. So the other islands put some effort into killing some of their coastal buildings to try to reduce that number. And then we got an event that said on each board build in one land. I believe it's the land with the most invaders. Sprawl contained with the most. Sprawl contained by the Wilds is the name of the event, but I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah.
It's add a wilds to a land without invaders and build in the land with the most cities and towns, I believe.
Yeah.
And some islands had disease in the land with the most cities and towns, and some islands did not. And it turned out that after that event resolved, then Cookie Island had more buildings than Mountain.
Which Cookie was not even in the running initially. It was Mountain or Books, hopefully, and then Cookie ended up taking it.
Yes. So Cookie was one of the islands that said, like, well, we have a lot of buildings, but we prefer not to take the escalation.
Yeah.
They got a surprise escalation anyway.
Oh, that 90 towns across 48 lands.
Yep.
All right. So then I think the last thing of the awesome stuff that I had listed down for now was the Years of Little Rain event, which came on turn 4, I believe.
Yes. The Fractured player saw it on turn 3 and shuffled it into the top 2 cards of the deck. And then we gave Fractured a lot of support the next turn to let them use the innate fast to try to guarantee the event. Because if they looked at the top 2 cards and found an event that wasn't Years of Little Rain, then they could put it on the bottom, and then we would know Years of Little Rain was on top.
Yeah.
And that ended up not working, as in they looked at the top of the deck and saw Years of Little Rain, so they shuffled it back into the top. And the other Fractured player didn't have a fast innate that turn.
Sure.
And so we ended up not being sure whether it would be Years of Little Rain, but we won the 50-50 the second time around and drew Years of Little Rain off the top.
Nice. I remember this. I remember this largely because there was a huge spreadsheet of we want Years of Little Rain and we want to pay for it, but how on earth are we going to coordinate 144 people paying 4 energy per player, aided by water?
Yep. So we had a spreadsheet with like every spirit put in. This contribution would be low stress for you. This would be medium stress. This would be high stress, and this would absolutely break your game. But if we have to do it as a last resort, we'll do it.
Yeah, and I think
we ended up paying.
It ended up being like low to middle stress, I think, was where it sort of landed.
Yeah, most spirits ended up paying their medium stress contribution. A few spirits ended up paying their low stress contribution.
Yeah. So
like for me, the low stress contribution was all the water I already had in play. It literally doesn't cost anything. And the medium stress contribution was, hey, I can pay a little energy and gain a minor power instead of a major the next time I get a power.
Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything else you want to talk about with the game before I let you go, Mathematics? I've really appreciated this so far.
Yeah, just there were a lot of cool plans going on. We've talked about some of the bigger plans, the giant plans, the overarched over the whole game, as well as some of those smaller events that affected everybody. But there were tons of little things happening on all the individual islands. Like this didn't make it into any of the giant plans, but on my books islet, then there was transforming Wildfire player and a Stranded Shroud player. So on turn 2, then they cooked up a plan to use Flowing and Silent forms to move Wildfire's presence and use the Blazing Presence special rule with only one fire uncovered so it wouldn't add blight. But the Blazing Presence can push any number of Dahan. And with Dahan Insurrection, then that all those push Dahan deal damage. So they had Wildfire place presence, push Dahan, gather presence, push more Dahan, have the invaders ravage, that presence gets destroyed, it gets saved by Flowing and Silent forms, move it, push more Dahan, and they were able to clear almost all of the invaders off of Wildfire's starting board on turn 2.
That's amazing.
And there were tons of little cool combos like that happening all over both continents that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
That was just the one that I happened to be near and got to see happening.
And that's actually somewhere where I'll add in here. I'm hoping to do more of these retrospective videos with other players and other hosts from the game. So if you were in the 144 player game and you have a story you want to tell me or just share with everyone on the channel at some point, please reach out to me, and we will find a way to not put it in one of these videos. I might do a super cut of a number of different stories from people if there's shorter ones. I know we covered a lot of stuff here, but if you have more that you want to say about LRLR, if you have more that you want to say about the Great Coastal Defensive, just reach out to me and let's talk about it. With that, I think we'll wrap it up here. We've been talking for a while so far. But I hope to anyone who's still watching, this was an amazing game. I'm sure there's going to be more mega games in the future. I highly encourage you, if you can, to participate in them. Sign up for it. Help host if you have the capacity. This was just such a cool experience and such a cool way to see the community come together and work on Spirit Island things together. I really appreciate that this was a game that was played.
Yep, it was an awesome experience. I loved every second of it.
Yeah.
It was amazing. Great time. Highly recommend. Go ahead, join in the next one when the game's even bigger.
Yeah. We'll get some more fan spirits or another expansion at some point, and we'll go to 300 players or something. Who knows? It'll be crazy. All right. Well, Thank you, Mathematics, and I really appreciate you coming on. And I think we'll wrap here. Take care, everyone.
Thank you for having me.